You're good to go.
I think I am. I think it's 7 o'clock. So let me introduce myself. My name's Deb Canham, and every Monday night I do a half-hour live on either the serger or cover stitch machine. And I know not everybody has cover stitch, so I like to move between the two so that you all have something. So I'm going to start off telling you what I'm going to do next week, which makes no sense, I know. So for those of you that have sergers but don't have cover stitch machines, I am going to be looking at how you can do your bindings using the serger. Okay, just to cut it short, you're going to be using fusible thread, and we're going to sew it, fuse it, and then you can finish it off. So that will be next week. But this week I just had to share this with you because I'm so thrilled. I've been practicing and trying out things. And what it is I have before used my knit woven binder to put a quilt binding on. And I liked it. It was simple, it was easy, but I've perfected it. So I wanted to pass it on to you and show you how I did it. So this is the quilt I've just finished. And do you see how, let me see if I can show you a corner, how really nice and straight and perfect my binding is. I'm so thrilled about it. I'm more thrilled about the binding than I am the rest of the quilt because it's not something I enjoy doing. And I use my knit woven binder to do it. And I think it's perfect. So a little bit about the quilt. I was out shopping with Missy Billingsley and I said to her, my granddaughter would love that quilt, and I bought it. And I had no idea at the time how much work there was in it. So I've been teasing Missy all the last 6 months, saying if she was any kind of a friend, she'd have stopped me from getting that quilt pattern. But anyway, now it's done. Of course, I love it. I actually really enjoyed making it too. But the binding was the best. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a bit and then I'm going to check you for questions, okay? So let's start off with why. Oh, let me tell you a bit more about the quilt because I know somebody will ask. It is designed by Leanne Anderson from a whole country caboodle. And the name of the quilt is Moon and Back Critter Quilt. And I did add a couple of animals in because I had to move one, you know, never goes quite as I plan. So I added Rosie, our dog, because my granddaughter will love that. And she loves flamingos, so I added the flamingo. Anyway, on to what we're covering. So what do I love about putting a binding on using the knit woven binder? Well, first of all, if you think about it, there's a lot of work with doing a binding. You have to cut it out, you have to press it in half, and then you have to pin it all the way around. I didn't have to press it, I didn't have to pin it. Then you have to stitch it on, press it again, pin it again, and stitch it again. I didn't do that. I just sewed it round once. And one of the things I really, really like about it is it doesn't stretch the sides. Do you see how nice and straight the sides are? Because the quilt and the batting and the lining is all secure inside the binding. Okay, so I really love that. And remember, the knit woven binder, the way it feeds, it creates a little bit of tension on the binding. And I think that really helped to make it really flat and straight. And of course, the stitching is perfect all the way around. It's the same distance from the edge. I know you can't see it. I'm going to give you a closer look in a minute. And it's the same distance on the back. So that was thrilling. And the corners. I think the corners are really sharp and neat. And I'm going to show you that in a minute, okay? And one more thing. It was quick. It was easy. It was super fast. And that was my favorite bit of it. So let me just give you a close-up on the corners, okay? And then we'll talk about that. So I'm going to put you on the other camera, if I can find it. Okay, here is my corner. Do you see how nice and sharp it is? I hate it if corners aren't really sharp. Now, there's always going to be a downside to something. So this is my finish. I don't have a mitered corner, but do you see what I did? I just basically turned back the binding and stitched it, hand stitched it down. I didn't mind hand stitching. I only sewed it once. I could give hand stitching a few minutes. And actually, I was thinking today that I could have cut that binding a bit longer and brought it back to here. I think that would look even neater. But I think you'll agree, it's pretty good. So what are the downsides? So the downsides, some people like their binding to be double, okay? They like a double fabric over their binding. For me, I think that's a bit stiff, and I'm happy with a single binding. And that's what this is. It's a single piece of fabric, okay? It's folded under on the front and back, but it's still a single piece of fabric going over the edge there. And my very favorite quilter says she likes those bindings, so I'm with her. Now, I'm going to address traditional quilters because I know this is hard for you. Some people feel there is a right way to do something. And if you're a traditional quilter and you feel that way, I totally respect it. But if you're somebody like me that isn't a traditional quilter, and I always say I'm not a quilter, I think it's just brilliant. It's neat, it's tidy, it's fast, it's perfect. So that's what I'm going to show you today. So let's have a look. I'm going to first of all tell you that I used, and it's on my machine, so I'll show it to you in a second. I used the knit woven binder. Now, some of you can use that, some of you can't. Okay, you need chain stitch. This is cover and chain stitch technique. So you need chain stitch. Now, I know a million of you are going to ask me, can I use the knit woven binder on my machine? So I'm just going to cover it briefly, okay? Look at your makeup machine. If you have a dedicated cover and chain machine, quite possibly. For the Baby Locks, yes, your old cover and chain machine, the new Euphoria, the Triumph, the Ovation with a new table. You have to have an alternate table. And I know those of you with the Evolution say, how about me? How about me? No, and I'm just going to pass this through because I have no knowledge of it particularly. But I know there are people out there that have in some way managed to get the knit woven binder onto their Evolution, okay, using duct tape, maybe an extension table. There are extension tables available overseas, and I'm not going to address all that. But if you want to start a thread up on my group, Deb Kind of Surgery Sanity Projects, I'm sure somebody with knowledge or who does it will come up and tell you how they do it. And the reason I can't tell you is because I have these bigger machines, so I don't need to. So the knit woven binder is the big binder, okay? I'm going to turn you around in a minute. Don't get it confused with this one, which has the same name, double fold bias binder. But you'll note it doesn't have knit woven in front of it. It's a smaller binder, and actually it's a different size, because what I'm going to tell you is that to do this, I use the knit woven double fold bias binder, size 15mm. That's the largest one they do. Okay, and I'm now going to turn you around and show you it on my machine. I just had to move my camera so it might not be exactly where we want it, but we'll move it. If you get dizzy, look away. So any questions, Richard?
Yes.
Go on.
When are you going to come with a class teaching quilting techniques such as this?
Oh, don't make me laugh. I'm not a quilter. But I'm getting into it, you know. I'm getting into it.
Such as these you've shown us tonight.
This is, honestly, you're going to love it. You're going to, unless you don't have a knit woven binder, you're going to love it. Okay, so here it is. You can't mistake it. It's the biggest of all the binders. It has this rail on the back here. And how do we do it? Well, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to cut out your strips. Actually, I could bring you back round to me because I need to explain that.
What size do you recommend for the Evolve? I don't know what she's talking about.
The Evolve, you need to check that you can actually use the knit woven binder on an Evolve. You can't normally, okay? It would need to have some kind of adaptation. But I'm not going to address that tonight. So let's talk about the strips. Biggest thing about binders is getting the right size strip. And the size strip you want for this binder is 1 7/8, okay? Now that said, it depends on your fabric. I might cut 1 7/8 out and it works perfectly. Then tomorrow I use a different fabric and it doesn't. Okay? And the next thing is setting up, but I'll show you that when I get it on the machine. I did want to address this particularly for Jan. Okay? Jan wanted to know if you could go round corners with the knit binder. Well, you sort of can. What I didn't like about it, and why I won't ever show you or teach it or recommend it, is it wasn't easy, okay? It wasn't easy, and it was really hard to keep a sharp corner. And I'll never show you something that isn't manageable. Otherwise, it's no fun, is it? I didn't find it easy. I wasn't happy with my corners. So my answer to it, and I know there's others that do go around corners, is I don't think you can very successfully, consistently, okay? So that's not my method, all right? What you're going to have is you're going to have 4 separate strips. Right, so I'm going to move you onto the machine and just show you how I've got mine set up, and then we'll get going. Right, here is, I mean, you know, I'm doing a binding on a quilt, but you could do this on placemats, you could do it on anything, mug rugs and anything. So I've got mine set up, and the really important thing about the knit woven binder, is getting it set up, okay? People keep saying to me, well, I start stitching and then it comes off. Well, you didn't have it set up right, okay? Once you start stitching, it should stay stitching in the right place. And a lot of the time, it's just about moving it a fraction of an inch. Okay? If you get it perfectly set up, you don't have to fight with the binding. The other thing I'm going to say is that make sure you use a metal foot. Okay, so you're going to cut the strips 1 7/8. Thanks, Donna. So the next thing I'm going to tell you is that I have my stitch length at 3. Okay, stitch length at 3. And you know, I'm always telling you that I don't worry too much about my chain looper tension. For this particular task, I have my chain looper tension, okay, on what do I have it on? 2.1, so just 1 notch beyond the 2, and I'm using chain needle 1. And the first thing you're going to do is you are going to test that your fabric is going through the binder and under the stitch. So I'll start that for you just to show you. Now, you know I've already checked it out, but that doesn't mean it's going to go right. You know how it is. So I'm going to cut a V in my 1 7/8 piece of binding, and I'm going to put the right side towards the back, and I'm going to feed it in. Whoops. Okay, I'm going to feed it in there, and then I've got to feed it through. So this is an important part because I think people push it too far. So I'm pushing it into here, and then I'm getting the tip and I'm pulling it through. And as soon as I see a tip sticking out, I'm going to grab it and put it under the needle. But before I do that, I'm going to make sure the needle's up, otherwise I'll break the needle. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to release, I've got a thread chain on here. So I'm going to raise my foot, release the thread, just so I can pull it back. Okay, there's my thread chain back there. And what I'm going to do is grab the tip and pull it straight back on itself and under the foot. Okay. So I'm going to stitch a few stitches, see if it's in the right place. You know it is because I've already tested it. But you need to do that. You need to test where it is. And it's going to stitch close to the edge. But don't get too brave, okay? Don't be a hero. Don't go too close to the edge because it could be problematical. So I'm just going to show you one side, two sides probably. Okay, so here's my quilt block. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And I'm going to feed it in here, and I'm going to feed it in as far back as I can get it. Make sure my foot's down, and I am actually holding this end, okay? I could just move the camera a fraction so you could see that. And I'm feeding it into this section here, and I'm just going to stitch. And I'm going to stitch off, of course, you know, it's always problematic because you have to get off it anyway. I have to cut the fabric and run it through. Right, so I don't need all that. So let me show you. Now, I have used the wrong color thread. And actually, I used a different color binding to the one I wanted to use, but I wanted you to be able to see it. So do you see how nicely it's on there? Okay.
How do you line up end of binder to needle?
How do you
line up end of binder to needle?
How do you line up end of binder to needle? You know, you don't really get the chance to. You have to feed the fabric into here. Okay? So it's not a question of you lining it up. The attachment dictates where you line it. So that's one side. And actually, I'm going to now do the other side. So I'm going to put that in. And of course, I'm just doing a 10-inch strip, which is a 10-inch block, which of course is super easy. So I'm going to show you how I did it with my big one as well, because I know that you're not just going to bind 10-inch blocks. So wrong side of fabric towards you, going to feed it in again. Whoops, I didn't do that very well, did I? What's the back look like? I'll show you the back. I'll show you the back. I will do that as soon as I've got this in here.
Jumping ahead, aren't they?
Always ahead, yes. So here is the back. Do you see how nice that is? All my stitching's the same distance from the edge. Okay, so there's the front and there's the back. So now I'm going to do this side. So I'm just going to feed that binding back through again. And you need to practice, you know, I said practice on your strip. You also need to try and practice on your quilt too, because it depends how much batting and how thick it is as to where you're going to need to move this, because the binding is going to have to wrap around it. If it's very thick, do you understand that it's going to pull this stitch a little bit more towards the edge? If you don't get that, don't worry. Just know I said it. So I'm going to raise my foot and I am going to loosen my threads. I'm going to raise it to the high point because I don't want to break my needle. And that just lets that thread chain out the back. Then I'm going to grab the V, pull it straight back on itself. And if at this point it's not folding back on itself and it's gone wrong, don't think it's going to magically fix itself, okay? You need to take the fabric out and thread the binder. So again, just going in here, holding onto my binding. Actually, I do just want a little bit of a strip that's sewn, okay? I should have said that. And now I'm putting my block in. Cut it here, at least it'll be an inch less. Right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to, any questions, Richard?
Yes.
Some questions. Let me answer those before I
Please
go
tell
on.
us again what stitch that you are using on the machine.
Okay, I'm using chain needle 1 and I'm using chain stitch. And I want you to remember that you can always go and pick up the written notes that have all of that in there. Okay, so they will be in Deb Canham's Serger Sanity Projects in my files section. And I know it's hard for you to remember everything I've said, so I do write it down. Okay, and it gives you the written instructions for this. Of course, I haven't actually put it in there yet, but I will do straight after class.
And to that $60,000 prize-winning question, what's the little white-coloured screws called that you attach the attachments to the bench?
These come with the machine, not with the binder. They come with the machine. They're your regular spots. Right, I'm going to do one more and then I'm going to lead you on to the fact that, of course, when you do a great big quilt, you are going to have a join in there, aren't you? So I'm just going to do this one and then I'm going to go on to how to cope with a join, and then we'll press those edges and sort it out. So, whoops, I did that last time.
Why do you need to use a metal foot?
Why do I need to use a metal foot? That's a really great question, and I'm glad you asked it. Listen, I am a big believer in metal feet, especially when you're working on these binders, because you really want something that's in contact with the feed dogs. When you guys use those plastic feet, they're not as heavy and they don't contact with the feed dogs as well. So if ever you're using a binder, please only use a metal foot, and please don't use the nice short little what's it called, the curved foot, because it again is shorter and it's not in contact with the feed dogs, so it's not my favorite foot for working on binders. So I'm going to pull that back. Did you see how I suddenly realized I hadn't moved my chain back? I'm going to grab the tip and pull it straight back. If it looks funny, it's my left hand. But I am all right with my left hand. I'm better than I used to be from doing this, I think. Right, so again, stitch a bit because you need to have some binding. And then what I did was I cut off those edges dead level with the edge of the block. And then what I'm going to do is, again, just put it in, hold the end and stitch. I'm not going a breakneck speed, partly because I'm on a plastic table and it's a bit wobbly if I go too fast. Right, so I'm going to stitch off so I have some binding. I don't need all of it, so I'm going to cut this. And then we're going to go on to how to do joins. So we have 3 sides done. Okay, so looking good, don't you think? I mean, what's not to love about that? And then the back, perfect. Okay, so what about when we do a big quilt and we have a join? So what I'm going to do is move you over to my cutting mat, because, no, pressing mat, I should say. So bear with me a second while I clear a space on it. So somewhere I have, oh, here we are. So I'm going to move you. Sorry, I didn't move you, did I? I wonder why you weren't with me. Right, so here is my cutting mat. Just make sure my arm's on. So sometimes you have to join, don't you? Because it's not always long enough. There's my join. I need that one for my next demo. Don't want to lose it. So what you're going to do is you are going to sew your 2 sections together. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure all of you know how to do this. I have discovered that if you sew it the other way, it isn't right. You end up with a rectangle. But sewing it that direction, you have a join that you can use, yeah? So what I say is this. Because the binding is under a bit of pressure when it goes through the binder, what I did was I reinforced that end and that end. Okay, so let me show you here. Do you see how I've reinforced it both ends? And what I'm going to do, or what I'm going to show you, I'm not actually going to do it, is I'm going to cut it and then I'm going to press it open. Well, actually, I'm going to press it closed first. Then I'm going to press it open. Okay. And then I'm going to take, this is this 1/4 inch sticky tape, and I'm going to put that down here on this side, peel that off and stick down those two sides like that, because it's just going to give the binder less aggravation. Now, why would I do that? Well, I'm never going to tell you about something and not tell you where I had a problem. So on one side of my quilt, when I was sewing this, I obviously hadn't secured the stitches very well. So as it went through the binder, those stitches opened up. So since then, I've made sure I reinforce both ends, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this piece in, and we are going to sew that to the remaining piece, because realistically, you will more than likely have a join. And, you know, I've got to tell you that I didn't have, there was only that one piece I had problems with. But I've got to make sure I do it so that the join actually gets on the 10-inch block because it's so small. Right. Okay. So let me move you back to the machine, and I'm going to thread this in. You have to make sure it's not all screwed up like I just did it. Oh, and the wrong way around. Terrible, terrible. At least I noticed before I sewed it. Right, so feeding that in. And really, this doesn't give you any trouble. I just want to make sure I cover something that might give you trouble. So moving it down, making sure that my needle's up. It is, my foot's up. And what I'm going to do is release that thread and just pull back on it. Get that chain stitch out the way. And then I'm going to grab the point, put it back under the foot. And I'm going to have to sew 1 inch at least. See how my thing is feeding through? It's behaving at the moment. Okay, so did I sew enough? Yes, I think so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in. And I'm just going to feel, if it stops stitching or if there's a problem. And if that happens, I might put my needle down, just give it a little bit of a pull on the back or something. But of course, it hasn't given me a problem. Right, so what to do next? Okay, so looking pretty good, don't you think? Now this is what I've learned. You really, really need to keep these binding sections. Oh, I missed that binding there. Oh. Okay, well, I've got an option. Oh, that was the one I just sewed on too. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it like that because actually I'm going to sew over it, okay? So I obviously didn't feed it in as well as I should have done. So what I'm going to do is I am going to reduce all of these down to about 1 inch. At the end of this, I'm going to get my quilt down and show you the corners on that so you can, oh, I didn't make that 1 inch, never mind, it'll work. And then this one where I didn't catch it well. And if I was doing this normally, what I would do is I would undo that and just redo it. You know, I mean, sometimes things go wrong. I would just redo it, but I think I can get away with it for this sample. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to press all of the bindings back on those corners. So I'm going to go to the iron and do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to press it flat first. Can you see me? Sorry, I'm never too sure if I'm in the picture. These blocks I'm using are designed by Helen Godden, who's an Australian quilter, and she does a load of free motion, and she has these all available for classes and things. And I have been learning to free motion, and I've been using her blocks, and they're fabulous. And you'll find her anywhere on the web. On the web, Helen Godden, Godden. So what I'm doing is I'm pressing that down. This is the one that didn't catch, and then this one. And then what I'm going to do is just fold it back, press it. I did press that one. I'm going to press it again, just in case. And you know, I would use a clapper on these to get a really good press. And then all you're going to do at this point is you're going to take this section, you're going to fold it back once, and then fold it over to here. And see how nice, see how I did this one so it's level with the binding? Do you see that? Oops. See how it's level with the edge of the binding? And then the same with this one. Going to fold it back, and then this one's longer, so I'm going to make it a bit. Going to fold that back. And you know, if you're really opposed to hand sewing, then you could certainly machine stitch it, but I think hand sewing makes it less visible. This is my faulty one, but I'm going to make it work. Remember, you've stitched all the way along the binding, okay? Because that keeps that corner nice and secure. You can see I'm struggling with this one because it's undone a bit. But when I did it before, I tried to tuck these back under themselves, and I undid the stitching, and what that did was it destabilized that corner, and it's just much easier to do it the way I'm doing it. And this one I cut a wee bit short. Yeah. Of course they're pinned, but don't you think those are beautiful corners? Yeah. And on the back, you know, if you bring it out to the binding edge, they're really, really neat. Of course, they'll look neater after they've been sewn than they will just being pinned. But I think that's super smart. And what I'm going to do is come around and see if there's any questions. Are there any questions, Richard?
Yeah.
There's
Why is
questions.
it recommended that a person irons the seam after they sew it before they iron the seam open?
Oh, because that's the way you should always press. It's like pressing the stitching and then opening it. Always press the stitching. So.
Could you do it all in one setting if you change the corners into a curve or rounded corner? Could you do it all in one setting?
Yeah, one run, she's saying. Somebody's saying, if I curved all the edges, could I do it in one run? Yes, you could. Make sure they're not too tight curves, although this binder does do a tight curve. But yes, you certainly could.
Is that binding woven or net?
I'm using a woven, all woven, because my quilt's all woven.
Which foot do you use when you use the binder? I have a problem with the strips staying in place as I bind.
Somebody said they're having trouble with the binder, which foot do we use? Can I suggest that you just, it's a fractional move to the left or right. It's It's to do with how it's set up. I use a metal foot with the binder. I'm using the Euphoria foot here, which is their general foot. But any metal foot will work as long as it's not the curved. Okay. Any other questions?
Velma thinks, sorry, but I think I noticed that perhaps the bindings did not catch all of the back.
Only at the very beginning of that one that I did, where I did the last one, yes. But you can see now, I pinned it in, and you wouldn't know that. It was only at the very beginning. And that was my error. You know how my demos go. But let me show you my quilt up here, because you won't find any gaps on that. So. Oops. And look, there's a monkey on the top too. So I couldn't show you all of it. So there's the monkey. Okay, so showing you the bindings. Now, as I said to you with this one, I didn't bring the bindings right out to the edge of the binding, which would have given it a better finish. And look, it's all caught underneath. It's all the same distance. Okay, next corner, same story. Okay, all caught, all under the same distance. Again, I would bring that binding out to the edge of the binding rather than, I've had mine a bit short there. I did on all of them, but that was something I'd do differently. Next corner, see all the bindings are caught. Okay, nice corner. And then the last one, nice sharp corner, all the bindings are caught. And again, I would just bring that out. So, any questions?
Why can't you have a longer piece of binding and just cut off nearer the back foot?
You absolutely could. I think what I was trying to get over was, although I used a small piece, I was thinking in general, if you were using a big, if you were doing a big quilt, you needed to think about doing it in 4 sections, not, you won't get, well, I suppose you could join it, I don't know, whatever works for you. I didn't think of that.
I think one for another time. Can you show how the machine is threaded?
Yes, that's another class. There's videos on my website that show you that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what else do I have to tell you? I think, honestly, I'm so thrilled with my binding. It's so perfect. Try it. So I told you that the quilt blocks are designed by Helen Godden, great teacher on free motion from Australia. My website, debcanhamstudio.com. You need to know that for